Hi, I am Pierce Paul, corn and small grains pathologist at The Ohio State University. In this year's update, I'll focus my attention on diseases of corn, specifically tar spot. This is a relatively new disease, and it's been the focus of our attention over the last couple of years, especially in 2021. But in addition to tar spot, we had several other diseases. We had northern corn leaf blight, we had gray leaf spot, southern rust, and tar spot. And we had these diseases at fairly high levels. And the questions I had this past season is why so much disease and why such high levels of disease? And in my time at Ohio State, I think this is the year I've seen so many different diseases and at such high levels. So obviously something is happening that leads to high levels of disease development. What this does for my program, though, it allows me to evaluate disease management strategies, because you can only do that, and you can only do that well when you've got diseases in your fields or your research plots. Among the several factors that could have been responsible for high levels of disease in 2021 was the fact that we had a lot of rain. And I looked at one location, but I could have looked at any of several locations across the state and come up with similar sets of graphs. If you look at temperature on the left here, you've got, rainfall on the left here. We had more rainfall in 2021, 9 inches at the western location during the months of July and August. So if you look at total rainfall during the months of July and August in 2021, we had 9 inches. Compared to 2020, we had 5.5 inches, and 2019, we had 3.7 inches. If you look at relative humidity on the right, pretty much coincide. Once you've got lots of rainfall, you've got high relative humidity. And again, the average high relative humidity was higher in 2021 than in 2020 or 2019. The 4 diseases I mentioned on the previous slides, they're all diseases driven by wet conditions. And that explains why we saw more disease in 2021, than in 2020 or 2019. So what we did, we took advantage of the fact that we had diseases at fairly high levels, and we evaluated several fungicides for disease control. This is a common strategy for disease management, and we get questions about efficacy of these fungicides every year. We get questions about how they affect grain yield, and the best way to evaluate these and to quantify their effects is to look at these when you've got diseases, and this is what we did in 2021. So you've got several fungicides listed here, multiple modes of actions, multiple active ingredients, some with a single mode of action, and we compare them in trials at the Western Research Station in 2021. So here's some data from some of those trials. We had fairly high levels of disease, close to 18% of the air leaf damage by gray leaf spot. This is one of the most common diseases in the state, and it was fairly high in 2021. 18% damage to that air leaf by the R5 growth stage is pretty high level of disease, and this could definitely impact yield. And what we did, we looked at these fungicides, we sprayed them once at the VTR1 growth stage. That's when we applied these fungicides. We collected disease information, and then we asked the question, how effective these fungicides are against gray leaf spot. The lower the bar means the more effective the fungicide is, and I've labeled a couple of these fungicides: Revitec, Feltima, Approach Prima, Meravis Neo, Delara Complete, and Lucinto were among the most effective. But all of these fungicides reduce disease levels compared to the check. Even number 10, which is Tilt, did reduce disease levels compared to the check. But the most effective ones were the ones with the labels next to them. The next question we addressed in 2021 was stock quality. We get questions every year about fungicide use for improving stock quality, minimizing lodging at the time of harvest, and how disease impact stock quality. So what we did, again, with the data we collected, in each of these plots, we walked the center row and we pushed the stalks, and if they snapped below the ear, we score them as lodging. We estimate percent lodging for each plot for each fungicide, and then we look at the averages across these plots, and here are some of the data. In the check with no fungicide, we had about 20% lodging. In other words, 20% of the plants that we pushed snapped below the ear, so 20% of those plants lodged. And then we compared them with lodging in plots that were treated with the fungicide. The same 6 fungicides that were the most effective in terms of reducing diseases were also effective, in specifically gray leaf spot. They were also effective at reducing lodging. Again, the lower the bar, the more effective the fungicide in terms of lodging. Again, Veltima and Revitec were the most effective, having the lowest levels of lodging, below 6% in this case. But then you had the other 4 fungicides that were also good at reducing disease levels, also reduced lodging. So clearly, in a year with high disease levels, such as 2021, fungicides are effective not only for reducing diseases, but also improving stalk quality. Remember, when you've got lots of damage to those ear leaves, what happens? The plant pulls sugars from the stalk, making those stalks weaker, making them more prone to lodging. And that's why you see a benefit to controlling diseases and to the use of fungicide in terms of stalk quality as well. The big question is often yield impact, and we get anywhere between 1 and 24 bushel increase in yield. But again, the fungicides that were most effective in terms of reducing disease severity were also the most effective at increasing yield, with yield increases ranging from 7 to 24 bushels. So all in all, in 2021, we saw the benefit to fungicide application, not only from a disease control standpoint, but also from a stalk quality standpoint, and as well as a yield response standpoint. The big question in 2021, though, was tar spot. So what we've done, I've compiled some slides here with some results from research, from my own research, but mostly from research done across the region in states that have had more tar spot problems than we've had over the last several years. A little bit on tar spot. It's a disease that's caused by a fungus called Phyllachora maydis. And this fungus survives in crop residue in the field. I know I had questions this past year, people planting corn after soybeans or planting corns in fields without stubble, without residue, and still had tar spot. The question is, where is it coming from? So even though spores are produced in residue and they can be splashed to the leaves, spores can also be blown in from neighboring fields. And we had a lot of tar spots in neighboring counties, neighboring states, and within Ohio, neighboring counties, and these spores can blow in from one state to the next, blow in from one county to the next, and blow in from one field to the next. And that's why we still saw tar spot in fields that had low crop residue in the field, or fields without crop residue, or even fields that were rotated, that were not planted corn after corn. So regardless of where the spore is coming from, it needs frequent rainfall, high relative humidity, and once there's frequent rainfall and high relative humidity, those spores would infect those leaves, and then the leaves would lead to the development of tar spot. At the end of the season, when we harvest the crop, those leaves fall to the ground, and then those leaves become residue again, and the disease cycle starts over. So if you think about the disease cycle, some key areas in terms of management would be help to reduce residue and use the fungicide, especially if conditions are wet and humid for disease development. We'll get the fungicides in a little bit. Typical symptoms of tar spot, as the name suggests, tar-like spots on leaves. And if you look at these a little closer, you can see these actually do look as if you splatter tar on the surface of the leaf. This is what it would look like. These are raised spots, raised black spots that look like tar, and these are called stromata. In these spots, spores are produced, and the only way these spores are released and spread via rain splash or spread by a wind is if there is moisture. If there's moisture on the surface of the leaf, so if there's leaf wetness, there is persistent dew, these spores ooze out of small holes on the surface of these stromata. And then once the spores ooze on the surface, they need water to be splashed around. Hence the association between tar spot development, and rainfall. Here's another leaf showing lots of lesions, lots of stromata on this particular leaf. And this is not an issue with tar spot. The more stromata you've got, the quicker the leaves die. So it can lead to premature death of these leaves. And that's one of the reasons why heavy tar spot severity can actually lead to a reduction in grain yield, because if this leaf surface dies early, then it's going to reduce grain fill and cause yield reduction. In addition to the typical tar spot symptoms, we have what we call fisheye lesions. This is another type of symptoms associated with tar spot. Basically, what the fisheye lesions are, these are the same stroma, but in this case, surrounded by a necrotic area. What this does is also speeds up or increases the percentage of the leaf that's damaged by the disease, and this also adds to yield reduction and yield loss as well. We don't see fisheye lesions as often in the US. We don't see it as often in Ohio. I found it in 2021, but prior to this, I probably only found it once in the field. But more typical of tar spot would be these lesions here on the image on the left without the fisheye lesions. But the fisheye lesions can also occur. We think it's possibly hybrid dependent or depending on the environment. We're still studying it to learn exactly why and under what conditions you're likely to see fisheye lesions develop. In addition to lesions on the leaf, both the upper and lower surfaces of the leaf, tar spot can also develop on the husk. And here we've got an image showing tar spot on the husk. What this does, it probably increases the chance of this disease spreading from one location to the next if husk pieces with tar spot end up in the grain. When you harvest grain and the corn is shelled, it's possible that pieces of these husks with tar spot lesions on it can get in with the grain and move around. Tar spot is not known to be seed disseminated, but if pieces of husk get in with the seed or getting with the grain, it can move from one place to the next. Tar spot is often confused with other diseases. I've had samples come to my lab with people thinking that they have tar spot. When we looked at the lesions, we realized that it was rust. And here we've got two rusts that are common in Ohio, southern rust and common rust. And if you look at these very closely, they produce black structures on the leaf that can be confused with tar spot. The difference is if you push hard on these pustules, they're going to rupture, and that's what figure D is showing. Image in D is showing a ruptured rust pustules. If you push on tar spot with your finger too hard, it's not going to rupture. You're not going to see spores. So that's basically one of the ways of telling the difference between rust pustules and tar spot. Both common rust and southern rust, if you push on the pustules too hard with your finger, they're going to tear open, they're going to split the surface of the leaf, and you're going to see spores. With tar spot, you're not going to see that. So to help you diagnose, tell tar spot apart from some of these rust pustules is look how it looks. That would be a good place to start. How it feels, if you push it with your finger, what happens, and then when it develops. Tar spot develops throughout the season. Even though rust can develop throughout the season, rust pustules do not get this darkish color until the end of the season, just before harvest. So the timing of when you see this would also be useful to help you determine whether you're working with tar spot or not. In Ohio, tar spot showed up for the first time in 2018. It remained restricted to counties in the northwest corner of our state for about 4 years. But then in 2021, we saw tar spot spreading eastwards and southwards. So we had more tar spot in the state, in more counties affected by tar spot in the state in 2021 than we had previously. We had, based on my counts, we had more than 30 different counties reporting the presence of tar spot. This red color does not give you an idea of how much tar spot or how many fields in a given county was affected, but it gives you an idea of whether or not tar spot was present in that county. So if we had a single field with a single plant showing tar spot, that county was lit up as being positive for tar spot, and the map was colored in red to show that tar spot is present. It doesn't show you how severe the disease was or how much yield loss was associated with the disease. Across the region, we had quite a bit of tar spot as well. Several states in the Midwest had tar spot at fairly high levels, and that's my speculation as to why you saw tar spot in fields that did not have crop residue, because spores are easily blown in from neighboring fields with this much tar spot in the region. So the questions were asked, why tar spot and what drives tar spot? Well, first of all, hybrid resistance. If you've got susceptible hybrids planted in the field, then you're more than likely to have tar spot. We don't know which hybrids are most susceptible or more resistant quite yet. We're still doing that type of research. But here's some data from my colleagues at Michigan State showing, you've got side by side resistant materials with less resistant materials or more susceptible materials. And clearly the resistant materials stayed green. All of these are under the same set of environmental conditions, yet you've got some materials that stay green and some materials damaged by tar spot. So clearly resistance plays a role. Now with tar spot, resistance does not mean zero disease. What resistance means is that you get less disease on the given set of environmental conditions compared to the more susceptible material. And by association, the more resistant material are less likely to suffer yield reduction due to tar spot than the more susceptible materials. The other factor is moisture. Here again, some data shared by my colleagues at Michigan State, showing here wherever the central pivot passed and passed repeatedly, where you had more moisture, you got more tar spot. These are leaves badly damaged. This is not due to maturity. As you can see from the edge here where there's less moisture, plants are still green. So this is not plants maturing, but plants dying prematurely or leaves being damaged prematurely as a result of tar spot. So if you've got susceptible material planted and you've got high moisture, as in the case here with this central pivot, then you're likely to have more tar spot. And the edge here where there's less moisture, there was less tar spot. In Ohio, we asked the question, why did we see differences in tar spot across the country? Across the state. And I looked at 3 locations where I do most of my research. We did have more moisture across the state in general. We had more rainfall, more humid conditions. But we wanted to look at how the moisture or the rainfall was distributed throughout the growing season and if this had anything to do with tar spot. So here at Worcester, we had about 9.6 inches of rain, but we had very low tar spot in Worcester. So the amount of rain doesn't seem to be the main driver. Most of the rain in Worcester was distributed during the first 2 to 3 weeks of July. And then during the last week of July and the weeks of August, we had less rain. At Western, where we had slightly more tar spot, the rain was more evenly distributed. But look at the amount, pretty similar amount in terms of the total amount of rain during that 8 weeks between the 1st of July and the end of August. So we had total rainfall, very similar amounts of total rainfall at these 2 locations, but we had slightly higher levels of tar spot at Western, and we didn't have, at least in my research plot, I did not see tar spot in Worcester, which is in Wayne County. Western is in Clark County. The location where we saw the most tar spot was at Hoytville. We had slightly less rain, but it's still a lot of rain during that 8-week period. This is total rainfall. But what happened is that the rain at Hoytville was more evenly spread out over those 8 weeks. So what this tells us is that when you've got rain, the amount of rain is not the only, doesn't tell the whole story. Is how the rain is distributed, how it's spread out over that 4-week period, the weeks between July 1 and the end of August, is what drives tar spot. We're still doing research to quantify this a little better, but based on our observation, it would suggest that the location with the highest level of tar spot had more frequent rainfall throughout the growing season compared to the location with less tar spot. Even though it had slightly more rain in terms of total amount, that rain was less well spread out across the growing season. So with tar spot, the question here has been, how effective are fungicides? I've done my own set of research here in Worcester and at Hoytville, as well as at Western, and I have not had tar spot in my trials in most of the years in which I've done my research. I've done research over the last 4 years. So what I've done here is summarize data from some colleagues, work done by colleagues in Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We pretty much do the same set of trials. I've used these same 13 fungicide treatments, but I don't have Ohio specific data to share with you guys. So what I'm going to share is some results from work done by my colleagues across the region. Like I said, we call these uniform fungicide trials, where we all use the same protocols to look at tar spot and see how effective these fungicides are across regions. So here's some of the data. Here we've got the untreated check had about 5.5% of the leaf area damaged by tar spot, that's tar spot severity. But then every single fungicide treatment reduced disease severity compared to the check. So all the tested fungicides help to reduce disease severity. But the greatest levels of reduction were seen here with these fungicides at the end that have D's and E's above them. And these fungicides, most of these were fungicides that consist of multiple active ingredients. So what we've seen, I'm not showing all the data here, when we compare these double active ingredients, the triple active ingredients, the single active ingredients, what we found, and a lot of this is done by my colleagues across in neighboring states as well, what we found is that fungicides with multiple active ingredients tend to do better in terms of reducing tar spot compared to fungicide with a single active ingredient. So you can look at the list here, you can look at every single one of these. With the exception of headline, most of these are 2 or 3 active ingredients, and those tend to be the ones that do best against tar spot. In terms of yield response, correspondingly, the fungicides that did well in terms of reducing disease severity also help to increase grain yield compared to the untreated check. The yield response is not as clear-cut as some of the disease response, but still in general, fungicides that do well at reducing tar spot also did well in terms of increasing grain yield. So to summarize my presentation, what we've seen in terms of tar spot research, hybrid selection should be the first line of defense against tar spot. But since no hybrid is immune, in other words, resistance doesn't mean zero disease, under favorable conditions, any hybrid may still have fairly high levels of tar spot. So it therefore means that you still want to plan to apply a fungicide even if you plant your best resistant hybrid. Scout fields, look for tar spot, get an idea of whether tar spot is developing and when it's developing, and make your fungicide application decision. Tillage and crop rotation also helps to reduce tar spot, but again, tillage and crop rotation alone are not going to solve the problem because spores can be blown in from neighboring fields, from neighboring states. So you still want to plan to apply a fungicide, even if you plant corn after beans or you plant corn in fields that without crop residue, you may still have tar spot. You want to scout field again and look for when disease develops and make your fungicide application decision. Fungicides show promising result, but the product and application time seems to be very important. You want to choose probably a fungicide with multiple active ingredients. Those seem to be doing well or the best against tar spot. And then you want to apply those fungicides between VT and R2. That's what is showing up in our data as being the most effective against tar spot. Like I said, I share a lot of slides here based on data collected by my colleagues across the region. So I want to acknowledge Darcy and Marty and Damon and Nate. These are all colleagues who've had tar spot for more years and have had more experience working with tar spot than I've had, and they've done a fabulous job of collecting data, and I'm grateful for the fact that they're willing to share their data. Want to acknowledge my group as well. We're always out and about, walking fields looking for diseases, and this group here, a group of postdocs and research associates, they've been very helpful in terms of getting some of the tar spot data, and I want to acknowledge them. You're going to see these guys out in the field again this year. Please help them when you can. And most importantly, if you see tar spot, please don't hesitate to contact my lab and let us know. Because we can't get tar spot to develop in the lab or develop in the greenhouse, we're always tracking fields with tar spot to do some of our research to better understand this disease and help to manage it. That's all I've got. Thank you, and don't hesitate to send me an email if you have questions.